Hey y'all, my name's Keith. I'm the chef over at Hestia Austin here in the Emmer Rye family. Just want to say thank you guys so much for tuning in and continuing to support us as we go through these trying times. We're really excited to kind of come into your home, be able to share a couple things with you guys as we go. So today I kind of want to talk about some basics of knife sharpening. I like to think of myself as a little bit of a knife aficionado. I like to dork out, I like to buy a couple collector pieces. My girlfriend has basically put a yearly budget on what I can do in that department. My latest purchase was this guy right here, which is going to be a vintage Konosuke Fujiyama Blue 1, as well as kind of one of my favorites, maybe the most generous gift I ever had a chef give to me, which is going to be this really kind of old, early 2000s Murray Carter, one of the best bladesmiths we have here in America. I always like to, anytime I have some moments in the kitchen, break out a sharpening stone, teach one of our greener cooks, or kind of refine my skills with it too. It's sort of become a little bit of a passion project of mine to always have that. I'm not going to be sharpening on these today. I find a lot of sharpening videos and how-tos on YouTube. There's a lot of Japanese terms thrown around. There's a lot of flexing when it comes to the knives you have or the stones you have. So for today, I'm actually going to kind of focus on sharpening my girlfriend's knife here, which is going to be a Wüsthof Classic Pro Series, which is a pretty standard knife that you're going to find in a lot of home kitchens, whether it's something from Sur La Table or stores of that nature, whether it's a Shun or a Miyabi, some of those kind of brands. Most of them all actually come from Wüsthof or Zwilling. So it's a German steel. Kind of the basics of this knife right here is that it's going to be thicker on the spine with a taper that kind of runs towards the end of the knife itself. So the bolster would be this big chunky piece right here. If you have that at home, on yours, it can still definitely be sharpened in this way as well. You just have to avoid that little edge. So let's talk a little bit more about knife geometry before we jump into how to sharpen that. I think it's important to remember that your knife itself is basically a tapered piece of steel. So it doesn't go just from the spine to the edge in one big piece. You're going to find that it's most thick right here, right after the handle on the spine, and its thinnest is going to be right here at the tip. So it tapers from large all the way down to thin right here at the base. It also does that as a distal taper. So it starts right here on the spine and it gets thinner and thinner and thinner as it gets towards the edge. And when it comes to the geometry of the knife, it's important to remember that it doesn't just go from the spine all the way to the tip. What the actual end of a blade is a ground little section of the knife that looks like this, while the rest of the knife has a slow taper. So it's going to work from the spine all the way up, and then what we're going to do is we're just going to reshape that little edge of the blade all the way through the entirety of the knife. I like to think that when sharpening a blade, there are essentially three sections of the knife here. You're going to find this very flat, level, kind of profiled section towards the heel that I like to think of as 1/3 of the knife. And then right here, what I like to call the belly, where it has a little bit of a rock to it, but still a nice kind of flow throughout. And then the tip itself, which is going to have most of the curvature. You're going to find most of the movement right here of the blade. The type of sharpening we're going to be doing today is that of a Japanese whetstone. This one here has been soaking for about 30 minutes. I have it in this little third pan, which is a pretty standard piece of equipment here in kitchens. But at home, what I like to do if I'm sharpening in that environment is just leave it under a little drip on the water in the sink for about 20 to 30 minutes until it's fully absorbed. And a good test to see if it's fully soaked is if you can set it out, run your hand up and down it, and that water is going to stay there. When it comes to what a Japanese whetstone is, so the whetstone right here that I have is coming to us from Japanese Knife Imports in San Francisco. This is a Geshin stone. That's kind of their house brand. This can be a little bit more on the high dollar side. I think a really good sharpening stone to have at home is the King 1000, 6000. It's about $60 in total. As long as you don't drop it, you'll get a lifetime's worth of use out of it. I can tell you that I myself had that stone personally for about 7 years. So this right here, you're going to find the numbers are going to be almost in reference to sandpaper. So you're going to have your 1000 side and your 6000 side. Your 1000 side is going to be more abrasive, more designed to kind of grind that metal away from the edge of the blade itself. And your 6000 side, or your higher grit stone, can be between 3000 and 12,000 a lot of times, is going to be really designed just to polish the edge of the knife. And so the difference that you're going to find between a standard Japanese whetstone like this, as well as what a lot of knife kits come with, which is this honing steel right here, is that the whetstone itself grinds metal away from the edge of the knife. And then you use the polishing side to kind of refinish that. While the honing steel right here, all it's really meant to do is realign potential waviness in the edge of that knife. So whether you're chopping up coconuts or doing some really heavy use, you might find the edge of the knife is going to form a burr that's going to kind of wiggle down and become really dull to the point where you're not really able to cut a tomato or a bell pepper. So that's where this guy comes into play, is being able to kind of re-straighten that. But when it comes to shaving down some metal and actually putting a new edge on the knife, that's where these guys come into play. Grab your knife with your right or your most dominant hand and put your thumb on the spine and your finger, your index finger, on the outside of the knife to kind of just stabilize it. When I start on the back side here. So the knife is facing away from me, the actual blade itself is facing away from me. My wrist is straight. I'm not applying any pressure at all with this arm at all. It's just essentially resting and keeping the knife stable. I've read a lot and seen a lot of videos that are going to refer to, a certain angle of the knife on it. A good reference is 2/4 or 3 pennies, kind of being sandwiched between the spine of the knife and your actual stone itself. But what I always like to do is kind of get a feel for it. You're not going to scratch your knife just by putting it right directly on the stone and sort of lifting it up. And you can feel, if you're using just your index finger right here, by just lifting the knife onto the stone when it starts to transition from that raw, straight piece of metal to the actual blade itself here. So from there, I like to go section 1. So this is going to be this very flat part of the knife right here. And I like to count to 10 as I'm going back and forth across the entirety of the stone. So I'm going to use my left hand here, my less dominant hand, to actually apply pressure down on the knife, whereas this one is still just kind of keeping it steady. From there, we're going to go up and down 10 times. And then from there, we're going to transition to the second part of the knife right here, which is going to have just a little bit more curvature to it. You can see that on the first time I was relatively straight or at kind of an inverse angle with the knife here, whereas now I'm going to transition more into the middle of the knife here where I'm going to turn it because I need to follow a little bit of that curvature. From there, we're going to again go 10, and you can see that my angle has changed because the blade itself has changed a little bit to the left. So we're going to go 10 rounds. And you can see that my left hand is now positioned a little bit higher on the knife to keep the pressure a little bit more even and straight, almost a touch bowing in it. And then from there, the last section on this back side of the knife is going to be the tip. Now this is where a lot of beginning sharpeners kind of have a lot of struggles, and where I've met a lot of cooks that have ended up with a knife that doesn't have as much of a curve but has a very almost like straight triangle shape to it. Because instead of following this curve, they'll just kind of muscle through and create this very, very straight angle in it. Whereas I find an easy way to do it is to put your left hand right here on the tip of the knife, using the back hand right here, just kind of pushing up and down, slowly kind of just following the curve of the knife from the tip back here all the way up into the middle of the belly right here. And from there, it's important to think, okay, so I've hit all the sections of this knife from 1, 2 to 3. But what you could end up with, especially as a beginner, is an edge like this, and like this, from not following that angle of the knife. So what I always find is really important to do is to kind of do a couple finishing strokes just to bring all of those edges sort of back together. You may have sharpened a little bit on this angle, and then this angle, and then this angle. This is the process that's going to kind of go through and straighten that out so that when you're slicing, you're going to feel a really nice even slice all the way through a tomato or a bell pepper. So we're going to start here at the tip with my fingers right here on the base, kind of applying pressure. We're going to really kind of lean into it a touch here and just do a couple strokes, really light, not a ton of pressure, all the way through the knife. So I'm starting here, and you can see that we're following the curve of the tip all the way through to the belly, and then really flattening out and finishing off the edge right here. And that to me is just really an easy way to kind of take any potential adjustments in the edge and really kind of straighten them out so that when you're feeling that cutting all the way through, you're going to feel it really nice and smooth. From there, I like to switch to kind of the front side of the knife. I always refer to it that way because the blade itself is going to be facing you. And again, I'm going to visualize this in 3 sections. You've got your flat part on the base, you've got your middle with a little bit of a curve, and then you've got your tip right here. And so this way, I think can be a little bit daunting for a lot of people at home because you're essentially, you're taught not to have a knife facing you or facing your fingers a lot of times. But as long as you keep a nice grip with your finger right here on the spine and your thumb pressed against this and a straight wrist, you're not going to have a wild knife go crazy on you, if you will. So I think that starting right here and allowing this hand to really be the guide with your fingers out of the way is a really easy way to keep yourself feeling safe and secure through this. So again, we're going to start with a really kind of sharp angle. The knife is almost at a 45-degree angle away from the stone, and then about 2 to 3 pennies, 2 quarters right here in between the spine and the stone itself. And so we're going to focus on just that very flat part, really straight up and down here, 10 times. And one thing that you can see that's happening on the stone right here as we're progressing through the sharpening is this buildup of almost grit. So that's going to be a mixture of the stone releasing some of what that synthetic material as well as the actual metal that you're grinding off the knife here. But we don't want to actually wipe that away right now because what that's doing is acting as this compound to kind of break up and grind away the edge of the knife. So if you see that and it starts to look a little bit dry, just add a touch of water and keep going. No point in wiping that down. We're going to go to the middle part of the front side now. It's where we just have a little bit more of a curve. You can see I'm still really angled on the stone, going all the way through, but focused right here on the middle, and my pressure fingers are a little bit more towards the tip. We're going to do that 10 times with just a touch of curve right here at the bottom of the stone to follow that belly, as I like to kind of refer to it. Cool. And then our last section to do on this side is just going to be this tip here. And I find this side to be actually really easy for the tip, whilst the back side's a little bit more difficult kind of doing this motion. With this one, you can very easily see it from your perspective, that it's just this little curve in the knife, and you're just going to follow it. And from there, I always like to kind of do the same thing. Again, mimicking both sides is a really important part to having a really sharp, consistent knife. So I'm going to start with the tip again on this side and do those kind of follow-through movements all the way through the knife. So we're going to start tip down, push, and end all the way with the heel. You can see where that kind of goop built up on it. You're going to end all the way with the heel right off the edge of the stone. So tip right in, you're pushing. Not a ton of pressure here because you're not really trying to grind a ton of metal away. You're just lightly forming and making sure that all of those little parts of the edge are consistent and running all the way through. From there, I always like to kind of give a quick wipe down. You don't want to have all of this abrasive on the other side of the stone, and that's where we're going to kind of flip it over. So again, this one here is a 1,000, 6,000. So we just finished up our repetitions on the 1,000 side. We have a nice kind of sharp bevel all the way through, but it still feels very raw, really kind of abrasive and a little ground down and fresh. And so what we want to do now is transition to polishing that. And so right here, the most important part of polishing is to not apply a ton of pressure. It's a really hard stone. It's quite a bit a harder stone than the actual 1,000 itself. And so if you were to really kind of lay into the pressure on this side of things, you're going to undo a lot of the work you did on this side. So it's really important to maintain that 10, 10, 10 through the knife, but with a really, really light pressure on it. So you're going to start here on the heel, fingers down right again, index finger up top, and thumb right here on the side of it. And we're going to just do 10 reps. And you can hear a difference that it's a significantly harder and smoother stone. And so again, just really, really light pressure. And we're going to jump to the middle. And we're going to jump to the tip. I like to do each of these kind of three times all the way through. And then again, just finishing, kind of really rounding the tip of the knife right there. And then again, just to kind of take all those different parts of the edge and bring them all back together, start with our tip down and just do a couple of these kind of scooping movements all the way through, where you start with the tip in, push, and kind of work all the way through the entirety of the knife. The front side, you can see, is all polished, and if you look at it, you can see that it's actually at this point going to be a very, very kind of like brighter, more reflective metal than you're going to find on the rest of your chef's knife that's been through, you know, probably a couple years of abuse, a lot of home cooked meals. On this side, on the back side, and why I kind of saved it for last, this is where a lot of damage can be done to the stone. For the most part, they're actually really resilient. As long as you don't drop them, they don't break. But when it comes to polishing the back side of the knife, one of the easiest things that can happen is that you can lean too hard into it and scrape a big part here off this polishing side. So it's important to remember, don't go too hard with the angle. Remember, just light pressure, and then start doing it in sections again. So we're just gonna go 10 to the middle. So a little bit of an angle change for 10. And then the tip right here, we're gonna kind of scoop through again right here on this tip, all the way for 10. You can see my stone's getting a little bit dry. We have this nice buildup on the polished side. We're gonna add just a little bit of water to that. Start again with the heel for 10 reps. Down into the middle. And the tip. Cool. And then just one last one. Cool. I always like to give a wipe down after I finish that out, just so I can kind of see and reference and look at the actual edge itself, see if there's any fluctuations or adjustments in it. And I can see that there's a little one right here, and that's why it's really kind of important to go through and do those finishing movements. You can see as you're looking at the actual edge itself, a little change, a little bend in the light that's coming off of it to signify that one's sitting like this and one's sitting like this. And so here you're going to take the edge and go all the way through again. One of the best things to do if during any of this process that you have lost your angle or adjusted your knife a little bit and ended up with a scratch on it is actually saving this towel that you've been using the entire time to wipe down. Getting all this grit off of it and almost using it as that of a little bit of a polish compound. So you can go through and use your cloth at this point and just kind of rub down the outside of the knife. You're not going to see any immediate change, but if you were to do this after every time you sharpen, you'd see that you'll have a little bit more of a buffed knife, if you will. It's going to have a little bit more of an even sheen to it. Maybe some of those hard, scrubby scratches that are on the sides are going to start to kind of fade away. So one of the most important things to always be using when you're sharpening is going to be a stone fixer. And it might seem like a little bit of investment between getting, you know, if you were to get a king stone, it's about $60 and these guys are about $30. You're looking at about a $100 investment when it all comes shipped to your door. But what these are going to do is really supply you with a lifetime of sharp knives. When it comes to sharpening, the most important thing is that the stone is going to be flat, and that's what this here stone fixer does. It's a really, really, really hard stone that is meant to just kind of refine and straighten out the actual stone itself. So right before you were to put your stone away, it's really important to just dunk it in a little bit of water, take your flattening stone, hit the edges of the actual stone itself first, right around, because that's where you're going to find the most fluctuations. So we're going to hit both sides lightly, and then just kind of do a couple up and down strokes all the way through. And what you're going to be able to see really quickly is that, oh, right here's a little bit of a high spot. And you can tell it's a high spot because it still has a little bit of that color on it. So we're just going to continue to flatten just for another couple seconds, applying a good amount of pressure down on the stone and making sure to overhang off the edges to flatten it up. And from there, we're going to go ahead and rinse this off. And we're going to do that on the polishing side as well, just ever so lightly. You don't need to push too much on the polishing side. We're going to hit those edges. And then we're just going to flatten out the top. I think this is always an important thing to do right after you're done sharpening, so that the next time you grab it, you don't have to soak both stones and then start in that way. You can kind of just finish it and always know that your stone's nice and flat, and the next time you want to sharpen, soak for 30 minutes, jump on in, it's good to go. Again, thank you guys for watching and subscribing. I'm Keith, again from Hestia and Emmer Rye here in Austin, Texas, and thank you guys for being with us during these times. Hopefully you guys can enjoy some sharpening at home.